Thank you, Nina, and that was very comprehensive. Thank you for that. You'll be happy to know, Nina, that while you were chatting, a few questions came up, and I was able to answer them in the chat line for everybody to see. So that kind of keeps us on schedule. Why don't you keep your slides up, Nina? Keep the.
Oh, okay, right, okay, yep.
I was having a little bit of technical difficulties earlier, but we can keep it going right where you are. And keep in mind that, as Nina mentioned just a few minutes ago, that the threshold for requiring a single audit is $750,000 of expenditures of federal funds within your fiscal year. But what's important to note is that even if you have federal awards and pass-throughs from the state and city that are below the threshold to require an audit, you still have to follow the cost principles and all of the federal regulations, even though they're not going to be tested. What we've been doing for our clients is when we see federal money start to come through for the first time, and even if they haven't met the threshold, we'll usually start to outline the things that Nina's been talking about as part of our management letter or observations and recommendations, so that you're all aware of what processes you need to start putting into place. Okay, so keep in mind that as part of that single audit, we don't look at every grant, every federal grant every year. We use a risk-based approach to decide which programs need to be tested. And so it's often the larger ones and the newer ones and the ones that have had problems in the past. Facetiously, I've asked the question, going back to our days of schooling, if the teacher gave us the questions in advance, do we think we would have done better on our tests? And similarly, if the teacher would have said to us when we showed up, gee, you can open up your notebook and you can open up your textbook while you're taking the test, right? Do we think we would have done better? I mean, certainly the answer to that is yes. The reason I bring that up in this context is while we as auditors still need to put surprises in there and change up our procedures from time to time, there is a way that you, the entity, can understand better what we're more likely to test. And the answer to that is the document that Nina was talking about earlier, which is considered the OMB compliance supplement. What is it? It's a document that the OMB puts out every year, and it lists a number of federal programs, and it outlines the specific requirements of those grants that you, the entity, need to follow, and that we, the auditors, should be testing. So if you have, since it's a publicly available document, you can look at it, each year. I think it's in your best interest to take a look at that in advance, see what compliance requirements the feds are saying are more important than others, and what types of procedures they're asking the auditors to perform. That, to me, is synonymous with the open book test. Okay. Now, what you'll note in the compliance supplement is they outline a potential of 12 specific compliance requirements that are all listed here. Now, are we going to test all 12 of these for each of the grants? No. They outline for us what they think are probably the more important requirements that they want us to look at. But we as auditors have judgment to reduce that further based on what we think applies to your grants and what we think is direct and material. What I would say is, and for those of you that are with us today that have gone through audits with us, we'll almost always look at A and B, which is the activities allowed and allowable cost principles. And what we're most likely to also look at is cash management, which is how you draw down the money or request money, as well as reporting, which is how you then report back to them how you've spent the money. For specific grants, we'll look at other requirements here. If you have the ability to determine who's eligible to receive programmatic parts of the grant, we'll look at eligibility as well. Procurement, Nina just talked about. So again, it could be any one of these 12, but those are probably the 4, 5, or 6 that we tend to look at the most. Okay. So what happens if you don't comply with your grants? Well, if we go through testing and see that you're not doing what you should be doing, we need to then list them as findings. Sometimes they may incur question costs. Now, keep in mind that when we report those things in the audit, we're not the ones who ultimately determine if you need to pay grant funds back, but the funders are looking at these reports and they're making that determination partly based on are we putting findings in there? What are your corrective action plan? Are you having repeat findings from year to year? What is the nature of these findings and how severe are they? So keep in mind that you could be asked to give money back. You could lose potential future funding. And probably just as important is the fact that, because we do a risk-based approach each year of determining which programs, how many programs, and how many items on those programs we're going to test. If you have findings and you have problems and you have question costs, we're more likely to look at additional programs each year, look at more items on those programs, which again takes more time and results in a higher fee. I want to briefly go through some of the common issues we're finding in a lot of our clients when we do the single audits. What I would say is one common problem we often see is that sometimes clients request reimbursement for funding based on budget, not actual costs. And that's something that you can't do. You need to make your request for funding based on actual. The other thing we find often is that maybe they don't have invoices to support the expenses available at the time of audit, or in cases where they're allocating salaries, they often don't have time and effort reporting systems, which are critical. And we highly recommend using timesheets to do that. That will help then make sure that those allocations to the programs are reasonable and based on expenses and time that's actually been spent. One of the things that we really look to see our clients do is to make sure that you're reconciling the costs on your submissions for cost reimbursements back to the books. And again, that goes back to the different cost centers within the books to make sure that that's done. And so we want to check in cash management, that you're drawing down monies that you're using, that you're not drawing down monies too early in advance and sitting on that cash, or even worse, using that to fund other program expenses that are not related to the grant. And making sure, of course, that those expenses hit within the period of the grant agreement. Nina covered a lot on procurement. So again, I'll just reemphasize having those policies, the written policies, making sure they conform to the federal requirements. We'll be testing against those policies. Making sure that as you send your reports in, you're doing so on a timely basis. And as Nina also kind of walked through a bunch of is if you're re-granting out money, that you've gone through the required processes of the risk assessment of who the subrecipients are, and then monitoring based on what those risks are. One of the biggest things that I think you guys can do as the ones receiving money, grant funds, making sure that you have a way to comply, is to find out early in the process what's required of you. A lot of our clients that have state and city funding, they don't always know where the federal pass-throughs from the state and city are coming from. And they wait for us as part of the audit process to reach out to those funders through the confirmation process so they can determine if they've got federal funds. But you have to ask yourself, if you're waiting until after the year is over and a few months down the road when the audit process is starting to find out if you have grant funds that are from the feds, how could you have been following those regulations during the course of the grant period? So what we recommend is that you reach out early through different correspondence, confirmations, you can call it that, but reaching out to your grantors specifically on the state and city side and making sure that you understand if they're passing Fed funds through so that you know what compliance requirements you have to follow. Obviously, you should have a person dedicated within the organization that carefully reads your grant agreements, goes through the various requirements, and then have a monitoring system in place. Now, often with some of our smaller nonprofits, maybe this process is done by somebody outside the finance department. In that case, they need to make sure that they're in sync with the finance department so that you can coordinate, because a lot of the requirements are financial related. Okay. One of the great websites that I think you should be familiar with is the beta.san.gov. It replaced the old cfda.gov website. It gives you a lot of background information on the programs. Look at that so that you understand, not just the technicalities of what's in your grant, but just understanding from the Fed's point of view what they're hoping to accomplish in those programs. And I think that will help you as you start to, run those grants. And then, of course, as you run, the programs, have some type of a monitoring system in place to make sure you're staying on track. Where you're confused or where there may be differing guidance, and when we're dealing with the feds, that's not uncommon. Reach out to experts, and again, if we are your auditors, we welcome those questions throughout the year so that we can help make sure that you stay in compliance. Believe me, our goal is to make sure that you're running your programs well, staying in compliance, so that we have an easier time with the audit. Okay. So I guess what I'll leave you with is some of the things that Nina emphasized while she was doing her presentation, and that's staying current, making sure that you're in contact with your programmatic people at the grantor, attending webinars such as this, so you're staying current on new and ever-changing regulations. Reading the awarding agency websites and see what information they're putting up there. Keeping track of the OMB, and again, there's a number of changes that are always coming into play, both with uniform guidance and other memos, some of which Nina covered here today. And again, when in doubt, reach out to us so that we can help you stay in compliance and stay current on regulations. So that's really all we've got for today. I know that was a lot to take in. You should have copies of the slides that were sent out, and that should be something that you can use as a reference tool. But again, I'll re-emphasize that if there are questions, you can reach out to us. Nina and I will stay on the line right now if there's any questions that people want, and if we can try to do that in an orderly way. You can unmute, and or sometimes with the Zoom there is a raise hand feature, and if you can figure that out, we'll try to get to you one by one as well. But otherwise, I want to say thanks all for joining. I hope you got a lot out of it. And of course, thanks to Nina for doing a lot of the heavy lifting and really helping us as a firm stay current so that we can then keep advising you, our clients, as well. So thanks for attending today. We'll take questions if there are any.